Welcome everyone to this Café Terresol. It's a moment that we take to know better the community and new colleagues. Today we are pleased to welcome Giulio Castelli. He is an environmental engineer currently working on multiple research projects in the Mediterranean area, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central and South America. He's going to present a water harvest and water resource management community. There is the link in the chat. So, Giulio, you have roughly 30 minutes. We are going to record your presentation that will be shared on the COSAB website afterwards, and then we will stop the recording and we will let the floor for questions. So, floor is yours.
First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. My name is Giulio Castelli. I am assistant professor at the University of Florence. And I am an engineer and I'm working in the Department of Agriculture, but I've always developed a little bit of interest in participatory research, specifically for water and agriculture. And I'm presenting this work done with a lot of colleagues on what we call the co-creation of water knowledge. So just to say, this is not my work only, but it was the work developed by a group of people within the International Association for Hydrological Sciences, and specifically in this working group. So the International Association of Hydrological Science is an international association, basically active since the beginning of the 20th century. So the association works with programs that last for 10 years, and the program that we are in is called Helping Hydrology Engaging Local People in One Global World. So basically, within this long-term program, the associate of the IHS were asked to propose working groups, and we propose a working group on the co-creation of water knowledge with some objectives. You can see them here. Some were like short-term and then more long-term objectives. But why we develop a working group on this topic? So first of all, because we are in one specific moment in time where at the global scale we are facing some water-related challenges which are linked to what we call the Anthropocene, so an increased impact of humankind on water resources, both through climate change and direct impacts. And at the same time, I mean, we have this stress given by humankind in terms of pressure on water resources, but we have also a lot of pressures on humankind itself. So we are facing a lot of injustice given by how these impacts are distributed on the population. We see marginal areas, rural populations, places and context in arid, semi-arid, tropical areas that are most exposed to these impacts rather than richer and wealthier countries. So in this sense, we show, and we did also this in the paper, how biophysical and social processes are interconnected. So we are living in a connected system where you have an impact on water, and this impact is also generating cascading impact on the social system and so on and so forth. In this system, which is deeply interconnected, it's becoming more and more important to understand how we generate knowledge about water. So we need to understand how this that we call social hydrological process are generated, and we can't do it only with traditional hydrology, and we can't do it without understanding how populations, either in a traditional way or in a modern way, understand and solved and can give us more information on how to solve water problems. So while in the last year we had a lot of interest by hydrology and hydrological science, and this extend also to agriculture about participation and also co-creation, we are still in a moment in which traditional approaches to knowledge generation, and here I'm talking about hydrological data collection, modeling, and so on and so forth, are preferred. And this is like is a black hole, because like we can have a positivist approach to science, but again, like the modeling approach and the data-driven approach are based in context where we have a lot of data, and at the same time they tend to neglect these feedbacks between population and water that we were talking about. So we are at the moment in time in which we should make a step and try to see the problem, let's say, not just as hydrologists only. So in this work, we define co-creation as a collaborative process where diverse stakeholders, scientists, local communities, policymakers, and so on and so forth, jointly generate and apply knowledge to tackle water-related challenges by integrating scientific research with local insights. And as I mentioned, like this kind of definition, this kind of approach is still lacking in hydrology, and this is the goal of our group. As a first step to address this objective, we published this paper. So you have I sent the link to the working group in the chat, and at that link you will have also the link to this paper that is completely open access. And the first step in our work was to give a definition and a perspective view on what really is co-creating water knowledge. So we have this definition here, but then we have also elaborated a little bit on what does it mean and how we can use co-creation. So the goal of this perspective paper that I'm going to present today was to giving a little bit of contextualization of co-creation of water knowledge. What do we mean? Trying to set a set of overarching principles and key points to develop co-creative approach, and to discuss a little bit some case studies, and also like to understand at which level we are with co-creation research, and which are the problems that we have now, why we can't do co-creation. This is a first step that it's a little bit, let's say, narrative, and if you want, a little bit theoretical, but you may find in the literature, if some people are working with these approaches, you can find two terms like co-creation and co-production. Now, they have been used for similar definitions, similar studies. Actually, they can be used for similar studies. In our group, we are not so picky and attemptive and very. We are not sanctioning that much this definition, but simply by reading literature, we find out that if you talk about co-creation, you are discussing about trying to have a new understanding of a water problem. Okay, so when you talk about co-creation, it's basically meaning you have an hydrological model and you want to understand if that model is really the way through which you can assess a problem, and if that model is valid for the stakeholders, and if they want to use that model, if they find the model useful, if the assumption that you make in the model they have some bias that does not consider some processes that is important for the population, and so on and so forth. This is co-creation. You are basically questioning your approach to the certain problem. While co-production, at least according to the literature that we found, can be slightly more used for addressing the co-production of a service. It means like, I mean, maybe you are more familiar with the climate services. Okay, climate services are the services that are used to provide farmers with some like weather information with some anticipation. Co-producing this kind of climate services might mean that you are sitting all together with the farmers and you are saying, okay, like we are developing this product. How do you want it? Tell us what do you want, how to co-produce this service. So this is a little bit like a very, very extreme separation of the terms. Of course, you can use like them mixing them together, but it's just to explain why in our work we try to define like co-creation and not co-creation and co-production. This is our framework. So this is the framework that we develop. So basically, you see here, I don't know if probably okay. Can you see the laser pointer on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so our work conceptualize co-creation as an iterative process, and you see here the iteration by the spiral, which has four overarching principles: actionability, legitimacy, inclusivity, and openness. So these principles are overarching. They are like a bigger circle that says that if possible, these four elements, inclusivity, openness, actionability, and legitimacy, should be always present. And then we have four key elements that are like these droplets or petals that can be used, I mean, in several points of the spiral, in several moments of the co-creation projects, but there is not a rule. Like it depends on how the process evolve. If you should focus in the beginning, initiating and sustaining relationship, or fostering a collaborative leadership. So this is a little bit our framework, which are in detail the overarching principles. So the overarching principles are legitimacy, research questions that affect communities and non-scientific actors. What does it mean? That a co-creation project is legitimate when we are addressing the generation of knowledge for solving problems that are also problems of the population. Okay, if technically, if you have a research question that is only scientific, and you do a process to take data from the population, even if it's very participatory, this is not co-creation because it's a process that is legitimated only by scientific reasons. Now I stop a minute because I'm making a disclaimer to this presentation. Of course, we are dealing with topics that they are not black and white. Okay, so I'm going to give you examples. The examples are always like extreme. Of course, even for the legitimacy, it's very difficult to identify when the question that we want to answer with a co-creation project is really something that is only interest of the scientists, because you might argue that scientists are making a question that has a societal relevance. Okay, so I mean, I'm giving some extreme examples. Of course, it's not always black and white. And you might find processes that are legitimated in one way or in another, but it's just to give you like a sense of which these principles are, because of course they are principle is something that you should aim to accomplish, but they are like a guideline, not like a clear rule. Inclusivity is the second principle. So ensure that all parties are represented and benefit from the co-creation process. Again, like this is something very theoretical. Of course, you can find some situation where inclusivity is difficult, and maybe you have some social conflicts that you need to address, and you cannot ensure that all the parties are represented and benefit from the co-creation process. Maybe, I mean, in some cases, you can have a powerful actor like a corporation that maybe should not include in a co-creation project if you want to have some kind of outcomes, and so on, so forth. Openness is quite an important principle, and it means the need to foster an open, trusting pro-development, encouraging and creative atmosphere. So one thing that we made very clear in our work is that openness does not mean open communication, okay? It means fostering open and creative atmosphere. I'm saying this because, I mean, you have seen the group of authors is quite widespread, also in terms of ethnicity and culture of the people, and we know, and probably you know as well, if you have been working with like First Nation and grassroots movements, specifically for this is mostly true for America, but it can apply in other contexts of the world, that sometimes open communication is difficult and communities might have some traditional secret that do not want to disclose. You can have a situation where marginalized group, if you have a very, very open meeting, they don't want to participate or they don't want to take the stage. And this is not openness, okay? So openness that does not mean that we need to force everyone to speak in public and to disclose all the information. It means that there should be an open atmosphere and there should be a situation in which all the contribution can be given in a proactive way. And if someone wants to retain some information for some legitimate reason, this is fine. And then actionability is a principle that tells you that you should use appropriate technologies and tools that enhance the implementation of solution. Co-creation project is not a co-creation project if you are generating knowledge that then cannot be used for some reason. It's too theoretical, is just something that costs too much, or maybe there are some barriers to its implementation. At least you need to address this. Now I'm coming to the case study, because throughout this paper, we have some case studies that we use to explain these points. And the case study that we use for the overarching principle is a case study which is called Living Dikes. That was used to explain the design of nature-based flood protection in the Netherlands. And to us, this was a case study that matched a lot of points in the overarching principle section. So it was, of course, a legitimate process because people were feeling strongly the need to solve this problem of flood protection. All the parties were included. There was an opening, the open and creative atmosphere, even with separated meetings, and the solution was actionable. This means that really, like the solution that they found with this design, they were usable. Let's now jump to the key elements. The first key element is establishing relationships. It means to foster a shared understanding, mutual respect, co-define objectives, ensuring that all perspectives, especially the marginalized one, are valued, which is a little bit connected to openness and inclusivity. And the case study that we use for establishing relationship is this case study of floating treatment wetlands for urban pollution remediation in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. And in this case study, I mean, since the researchers were targeting some slums in the cities where these floating treatment wetlands were developed, basically they held a lot of separated meetings scouting the most marginalized sectors of the population to really establish a relationship with this sector of the society to then develop low-cost, decentralized treatment wetlands that could have been used in several parts of the slums and not a centralized system. The second element is collaborative leadership. Okay, so collaborative leadership, and this is also broadly defined in the paper. I'm not giving too much elements because we have 30 minutes, but is a leadership that is not centralized, is not hierarchical, and is based on a dialogue and shared goals, which means that the research process itself should not be led only by one person, and there should be space to discuss the objective and the approach. And the case study here is provided by colleagues from South Africa that showed, and we included in the text, a case study for co-development water resources management plans in the Western Cape region, where specifically the goals and the way of in which these watershed management plan were developed was based on this kind of leadership. There was not a centralized entity or a leader, but the community was basically involved at the leadership level in this kind of process. Key tools and techniques. And this is a very important element because you can define co-creation as something very, very theoretical and also as a great framework, but you should not miss appropriate tools. It means that when you are doing stakeholder engagement and you are doing co-creation with any kind of actor, it's important to have the appropriate tools, like organizational tools, to make this thing happen. I'm giving you quite an easy element, but I'm sure you would have been involved in your life in like meetings where strategies were defined and were decided maybe with brainstorming tools. What do you do in this case? You use maybe matrices, some specific icebreaker games, you use post-it, and so on and so forth. And these are all appropriate tools. If you try to do these meetings just by talking, it ended up in a big mess. And people maybe tend to drive the discussion in some areas, and it's not very constructive. And this is true also when you are working on water projects. this is another project from the Netherlands where basically researchers develop an integrated monitoring and forecasting platform for like drainage channels. But to do that, they provide a set of interactive tools like mapping, GIS, that have been used by stakeholders, meaning researchers, civil society, agricultural managers to discuss a little bit better the structure of this drainage system. They use interactive maps and so on and so forth. This is an important element and is a strong element of co-creation. People need to be expert in these tools. You cannot do co-creation as an amateur without a strong background on these techniques. And then this is one of the most problematic points, the knowledge integration. So this key element aims to allow an integration of different knowledges in one project or in one water action. What does it mean? It means that in some cases you approach a co-creation project by assembly meetings and so on and so forth, but you can also have group of information generated throughout different knowledge systems. Like this is true. Like if you make an example, like probably you have been working with social scientists or biologists, and if they bring on the table the data that they have, the way they collect, the way through which they analyze data, there is always a little bit of conflicts, at least in the ontology and in the epistemology of certain research approach. And this is valid at a greater scale if you are working with communities. Okay, so the case study that is provided here is a case study provided from colleagues in Bolivia, where basically the water quality and the environmental status of a watershed in Bolivia was carried out. And in this case, it was necessary to adopt a very strong approach to knowledge integration to bring together the hydrological modeling and the knowledge system of local population that was based on a concept of nature as a living entity. Okay, so you know that like people that work in South America know that there is this concept of Pachamama that people are using with a scientific approach, but a scientific approach that is based on a different ontological framework. And you have to recognize it. In other terms, you cannot expect people to participate, for instance, in a citizen science work if the citizen science approach it is based on the watershed as, I don't know, like unit of analysis. Maybe they have a different unit of analysis for their system, and you should bring the two things together. And this is knowledge integration. Finally, I think I'm going to close in a few minutes, so we are on time. Which are the future challenges? So first of all, funding. Generally speaking, funding in now, at least in Europe, works in cycles of 3 years. Okay, Horizon projects last 3-4 years, Prima projects last 3 years, and so on and so forth. 3 years of a research process, it means the first year is administration, the third year is writing the results. So the years that in which you are doing research is 1 year. Okay, this is very difficult for agricultural practices, I think, because like the standard is 3 years of trials. It's much more difficult if you want to make a co-creation approach. I mean, it's not enough. Okay, so we have found discussing that one of the main barriers to have an effective co-creation is that there is no time. Then another issue, and this is still unsolved, at least for water science, is that you have also to manage power dynamics, and people are not prepared to manage power dynamics. Usually, you go to a community and you think, this is a nice community, everyone agrees, and I just need to make a nice meeting and everything will work. And within a community, whatever a community is, you might have people that have social conflicts, personal conflicts. You can have conflicts between different stakeholders and so on and so forth. And you should be equipped to deal with this conflict, and it's not easy. Then you have two other points, operationalizing co-creation and institutionalizing co-creation. The first one is about how to include co-creation in ideological approach in the everyday practice. There is a lot of theory, a lot of things done, but there is not an operationalization. The World Meteorological Organization is trying to do a nice work now to include like traditional knowledge in weather forecast system, but it's still like an example and not the standard. And also institutionalizing is more or less the same thing, but not for research, but for government policies and so on and so forth. And finally, this is probably the main goal that we have to address is the acknowledgement of epistemic justice to ensure that all form of knowledge are valued. So we have a lot of attention on co-creation, but we need to be sure that co-creation is not just like we are hydrologists and we get some pieces of information by other knowledge systems, because of course they are giving us good suggestion, but the real science is ours. And this is something that is very, very underlying all the approaches that we find nowadays, at least the most diffuse. So this is quite an important point too. So I think I finished, and again, like this is the web page of the working group, but